Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a puzzle that connects crashing continents, really unique animals, and a super mysterious branch of the human family tree. It's an incredible story about how the very bones of our planet created one of the sharpest and strangest boundaries in the natural world. All right, let's kick things off by jumping back in time. We're in the massive, sprawling archipelago of Indonesia, with a guy who, right alongside Charles Darwin, was about to completely change how we see the natural world. He was out there to collect specimens, birds and insects, but he ended up finding something way more profound.
What he found was, well, it was just bizarre. An invisible line that divided the entire animal kingdom. It was so sharp it just seemed to defy all logic. On one side, all the animals were clearly Asian, but you cross that line just a few miles, and suddenly they're all Australian. It just made no sense at all. So this is the story of that line. What is it? How in the world was it discovered? And, get this, how the immense geological forces that drew that line also set the stage for one of the most mind-bending discoveries in the history of human evolution.
Okay, so to really get into this, we need to meet the naturalist at the heart of this mystery, the man who actually gave his name to this whole biological enigma.
And here he is, Alfred Russel Wallace. As he was traveling through the Malay archipelago back in the 1850s, collecting thousands of specimens, he started to notice something that, well, it just didn't add up. The patterns of life he was seeing weren't random at all. They were following a very strict and very strange rule.
The contrast Wallace found was absolutely staggering. I mean, take the islands of Bali and Lombok. They're separated by a strait that's only about 12 miles wide. But Bali's animals are classically Asian. We're talking tigers, elephants, that sort of thing. Then you cross that tiny channel to Lombok, and you're suddenly in a world that feels like Australia, with marsupials and parrots. It's like two different planets were just shoved right up against each other.
So, Wallace did what any good naturalist would do. He drew a line on the map. And this boundary, which we now call the Wallace Line, has been puzzling scientists for over 150 years. What on earth could create such a stark biological wall right in the middle of the ocean?
To understand this biological line, we can't just look at the animals on the surface. We have to go deeper, way deeper. We have to look at the very foundation of the islands themselves, the geology of the region.
And the answer, it turns out, is plate tectonics. You see, Indonesia is one of the most geologically complex and active places on the entire planet. It's not just sitting on one tectonic plate, it's this chaotic, messy meeting point for three of the planet's major plates.
For millions and millions of years, these colossal continental rafts, the Indo-Australian, the Eurasian, and the Pacific plates, have been crashing into each other in this ultra-slow-motion collision. This constant, immense crunch is what literally built the Indonesian archipelago, creating its thousands of volcanic islands.
And this whole process took, well, a ridiculously long time. Starting way back in what's called the Miocene epoch, giant pieces of land that were once part of the ancient supercontinent Gondwana drifted north and just smashed into the Eurasian continental margin. This relentless grinding and crunching didn't just build mountains. It also carved out the deep seafloor.
And here's the kicker. This tectonic collision created an incredibly deep submarine trench right where the Wallace Line is. We call it the Lombok Strait. And what's so important about that is that even during the peak of the ice ages, when sea levels dropped by hundreds of feet and connected Bali to mainland Asia, this trench stayed put. It was a deep, water-filled, and totally impassable barrier. So you see, this geological barrier, this deep trench, wasn't just some random ditch on the ocean floor. Oh no, it was basically a bouncer for life itself, creating two completely separate evolutionary laboratories right next door to each other.
So on the western side of the line, what's called the Sunder Shelf, life evolved from Asian ancestors. You get the classic placental mammals like primates and tigers. But you hop across that line to the eastern side, the Sahul Shelf, and bam, it's a completely different evolutionary story, dominated by marsupials and monotrines that had evolved in total isolation on the Australian plate.
But wait, it gets even more interesting, because the Deepwater Trench, turns out that's only half the story. Recent research shows it wasn't just about whether an animal could physically cross the water. It was also about whether it could survive on the other side. And the key filter here was climate.
Think of it like this. The animals from Asia's humid rainforests got to the Indonesian islands and thought, hey,
This feels like home. They could hop from island to island, no problem. But for the animals that evolved on the much, much drier continent of Australia, arriving in those super humid islands was a massive shock. It was just too different, a huge barrier. This ended up creating a mostly one-way biological highway, which is why the exchange is so lopsided.
And you know, what's amazing is that Wallace basically figured this out. He seemed to understand intuitively that the patterns he was seeing couldn't be explained by small, local stuff. It had to be something huge, something on a planetary scale. He was connecting biology to deep geology, long before anyone had even come up with the theory of plate tectonics. Just brilliant.
Okay, so this whole setup, this unique evolutionary lab shaped by crashing continents and climate, didn't just influence animal life. It might have also shaped our own ancient relatives in a way that is just mind-blowing.
And that brings us to 2003, on the island of Flores, which is located right in the heart of this wild geological transition zone. Here, scientists made a discovery that sent absolute shockwaves through the world of anthropology.
They unearthed something nobody expected, the remains of a tiny, totally new species of human. It was named Homo floresiensis, but it quickly got a much catchier nickname, the Hobbit. And its skull was only about the size of a grapefruit, even though it was a fully grown adult.
And when I say tiny, I mean tiny. An adult female stood just 3.5 feet tall. These remarkable little humans lived on Flores as recently as 50,000 years ago. And they weren't primitive. They made stone tools, hunted pygmy elephants, and had to deal with predators like giant Komodo dragons.
You can imagine this discovery just lit a fire under the scientific community. It sparked this huge, fierce debate that gets to the very root of our own origin story. Where in the world did this tiny human come from?
So two main ideas popped up. The first one is called island dwarfism. The idea is that a bigger ancestor, like Homo erectus, got stranded on Flores and just shrank over generations because there weren't a lot of resources. The second theory, though, is way more radical. It suggests the Hobbit came from a much more ancient, smaller-bodied human ancestor that left Africa before Homo erectus ever did and just survived on Flores in complete isolation.
Well, the more scientists looked at the bones, the more the evidence started to pile up for that second, more radical idea. A major study in 2017 found that the Hobbit's bone structure was just too primitive to have come from Homo erectus. The conclusion was pretty clear. It represents a separate, much older lineage. It seems like the unique, isolated geology of Flores acted as a kind of sanctuary, preserving a lost branch of the human family tree for hundreds of thousands of years.
So from this invisible line that splits the animal kingdom to the real-life hobbits of Flores, the story of Indonesia is just this powerful reminder that biology is literally written on a geological canvas. The collision of continents created this incredible evolutionary laboratory that's still full of secrets, leaving us with a really tantalizing question. What other chapters of our planet's, and maybe even our own history, are still waiting to be discovered on these islands?